Michael, the Mercedes guy here, and this is a nice original 108 car that 280 SE that I'm going to have for sale in a bit and do a little work to it. Today we're going to do heater controls. Now Mercedes starts with the heater and they build the whole car around it, so you got to pretty much disassemble most of the dash. So I'm going to show you how to do it. Okay, to get to those heater controls, now fortunately we're not doing the heater box. That's like a 2-day job if you're lucky. But the heater controls, what we'll remove will be the speaker and speaker cover, and it's a little easier with the radio out of there, the ashtray and the glove box. And then we'll be able to get to those controls. Okay, to start the job here, we're going to get this steering wheel out of the way. Now, sometimes you can grab this and pull it off, but it's very fragile. And so if you can get a knife, a putty knife in here, it will protect that, and you can see what I'm talking about. It's very fragile stuff there. And there's a nut way down in there. Okay, you may not have the huge metric socket, but a 7/8 socket will do the trick. Now, sometimes you can get that nut loose if you have somebody hold the wheel and use a breaker bar. Do not use the steering wheel lock of the key, because you'll break that. Now, I use impact wrench, so we'll just take that off of there. And the wheel. Now, what you want to do before you pull that wheel off is to take a look at the index. On that shaft is a straight mark. And I don't know if you can see it, but there's actually a little center punch mark on the wheel hub, and it actually lines up. If it doesn't line up, you want to reach in there with something real sharp and make a mark on the hub so that you get your steering wheel back on where it belongs. Okay, now your car may not have the original panel. This car does, and there's a couple of clips that hold the panel on. And I'm using a tool that I've taken a grinder to and made it's a very stiff one, and there's the clip that you have to pop out. Now, it's very possible your car is not original and has, you know, screws or something like that. I've got the panel off. The reason why, you got to reach your arm way up in there, and on the back of this cluster is a nut that holds the cluster in. Now, sometimes people never put them on, and you can grab this cluster and you can wiggle it out. Now, this is a common thing that happens. These rings, by now the glue has failed. I was actually grabbing this back on the plastic. You never want to grab the edge where the rings are, but if they do pop off, you don't bother cleaning them, because you'll bend them. You'd put a tiny dab of epoxy in about 4 places and glue that back on. But anyway, we're gonna, to get your arm up in there, there's a bracket under the dash here. This bracket has 2 8mm headed screws. You may have something different by now, but anyway, you want to get those out of there so that you can pull that assembly out of your way. Because it's the only way you're going to get your arm up in there. is to move that out of the way and then be ready to have a few scratches on your arm and reach clear up in there. Now, I pulled the parking brake handle out a bit, and when you try to get your hand up in there, you'll find you can't, and you need to push some wiring out of the way. And then if you have a neighborhood kid that's young with smaller hands, oh God, I got my hand out. That's the nut that you're dealing with. And it may be a wing nut, but now that cluster can come out. And when your hand's up in there, you can push it as well. Okay, now, cluster's loose, but before you pull it out of there, you want to do some protection. Now, you don't want to put tape on the wood. It can pull off the finish. You want to tape it to this vinyl strip right here. And that's to keep from scratching that vinyl strip as well as damaging the wood. Anyway, okay, we got this out of here ways. What we're going to do next is wiggle this pigtail off, and then reach in there and undo the nut on the speedometer cable. It's usually loose enough for your fingers. If not, you need a pair of pliers on it. Then we've got this oil pressure line, and that requires a 13 and a 10. And this is real important. You don't want to just put a 10 on there, or you can break this. You want to put a 13 on that nut, and then grab the wrenches and pull them towards each other. Then there's no chance of breaking anything. Now, at this point, you cannot start the car, because with this oil pressure line out, it'll make a real mess. Next step is this temperature sensor line. Now, you may choose to not pull the other end of the line out of the block on the cylinder head. The whole reason you want to pull a cluster out is there's a nut right here on this chrome bezel, and you can reach it without pulling the cluster completely out of the car. However, I choose to service this cluster, and it's easier to do with it out of the car. You can service it in the car, but it's a little more hassle. And by servicing, I mean to take all these bulbs out and testing all those bulbs, as well as soldering a jumper on this rheostat, because the rheostats hardly ever work, and then you don't have dash lights. Now, that can also be done with the cluster in the car by removing these two screws and pulling the rheostat out. However, I'm going to show how to remove the bulb out of the attachment to the cylinder head. Okay, the temperature sensor has a bulb that screws into the block, and here's what it looks like. It's a bulb like this. So, what you want to do is put a drain pan under where the bulb is. Don't be putting antifreeze on the ground. Not good at all. Also keep in mind that when you have a pan of antifreeze, if you're going to store it like that, you need to put a board over it, because if a cat or a dog starts to lick it, it's sweet and it'll kill them. So get your drain pan under there, and it's 14 millimeter wrench is what you need. You want to pull off this rear spark plug, and there is the bulb right in there. And you want to have a 14 millimeter bolt or something similar with some Teflon on, so you can screw it right in the hole real quick so you aren't going to lose a lot of coolant. Now, one thing you want to make sure is that that nut turns easily. If it doesn't turn easily, then what you need to do is pull this plastic back off of the nut and grab the sensor tube with a little pair of pliers. And let me show you here. See, this one is froze on the sensor tube. If you start turning this, and obviously whoever took this out of the car twisted and twisted and twisted, and you break that, and then it doesn't work anymore. So you grab this brass part right here with a pair of pliers or a little pair of vice grips, and then you turn the nut. If it still is froze, then what you need to do is get out your propane little torch and heat that up. You want to take a wet rag and put it around underneath the bulb area so you don't burn up anything, and heat this up good and hot, and then try turning it, and that should fix the problem. You need to turn this nut independently of the tube and the brass fitting. Okay, and I'm getting that out of there, and I've got my bolt ready to put in real quick. You want to have the radiator cap on tight. I had to put a pair of vice grips on there. You want to be very careful when you're doing that. Okay, block that with my finger, and then get your bolt in there. Now it's different threads, so you can only put it in just a couple of turns at the most. That's a fine thread bolt. There we go. Now you still cannot start the car because the oil tube is disconnected. So we're going to pull off this connection. All right. Now, next step, we got to undo these wire ties and get this through the firewall. Okay, on early 280 SEs that are floor shift, they have the neutral safety switch mounted on the firewall. Now, I can see that the top to this bakelite connector has come off, meaning that if that's the case, these wires can all come out of that connector, and you got to be very careful. But you pull the connector off, unsnap the link this cable goes down to the transmission and tells this switch what to do. This is called a neutral safety switch. It also has the backup light switch in it. And you actually need to unbolt it off the firewall. Then you can access more easily how to pull this tube through the firewall. There's going to be a grommet on it like this. You want to take a screwdriver and push on that grommet and push it to the inside of the car. Then you can pull this through the firewall. And you want to be very careful as you pull on this and come out and make sure you're guiding it properly so it doesn't hang up on this thing. This is hang up on things because this is a very fragile item here. So that's how you pull a cluster completely out of the car. In this situation, I'm just going to leave it in the car. I can service that in the car. But if you have a temperature gauge that doesn't work, then you're going to need to pull this out. And you can send these gauges in to be serviced, or you can contact me. I have them for sale. There is one rebuilder that rebuilds them. They charge way more than I do for a good used one.